Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Lamed discusses the psul of a stolen lulav or any of the other four minim that are stolen. The Gemara considers two possible reasons it may be puzzle. One is because it's not lachem, it's not yours. Now this is not necessarily true. Not everything that you stole is not yours. The halacha is that at some point an object which you stole belongs to you. You do have to return it, you do have to give it back, you do have to make good on your theft and return it or buy another one, but it still belongs to you. It halachically and legally is considered to be your property. That is, there's two ways generally of that happening. One is with yish and shini rishus, that is, the owner gives up hope of getting it back, and it changes possession from the thief to somebody after the thief. So it could be a stolen object then that belongs to the person who's holding it. Another way is that there's yish and shinu maisa, that is, that it changes. Again, the owner gives up hope on ever getting it back, and it's changed physically in some way from what it was when it was stolen to what it is now. These are two ways in which a stolen object can become yours. Now, something which is stolen and becomes yours would not have a psul of lachem. You couldn't say, well, it doesn't belong to you, because it does belong to you. There is another possible psul, and that is that it's mitzvah haba ba'avera, that the way you'll be accomplishing the mitzvah of olav is through an avera. The agency of an avera allowed you to get it, and that might be a psul. That might mean that the mitzvah doesn't count either. The Gemara is going to discuss that. Now, a way to tell the two apart is, what about a borrowed olav? A borrowed olav is not a mitzvah haba ba'avera, nothing wrong with it, but it is not lachem, it doesn't belong to you. Now, it's also significant to keep in mind, the Torah only says lachem on the first day of Yom Tov. The Torah only says to take a lulav of the first day of Yom Tov. Lachem is limited to that. Anything afterwards would not have a psul of lachem. And therefore, if the only psul of a stolen lulav is lachem, that it's not yours, then it should be fine later days of Yom Tov. And of course, like we said earlier, it should be fine if you had yish and shini rishus or yish and shini maisa. If the psul is lachem, though, it should also apply to a borrowed lulav. So let's see the Gemara. The Gemara is first proving that there is a concept of a stolen lulav being a psul of mitzvah haba ba'avera. There's a concept that you can't fulfill the mitzvah with something that came about through an avera, and the Gemara shows it from a stolen carbon. And it's a pasuk in Malachi. It says, "Va'aveisem gazul ve'es ha'pesach ve'es ha'chola." You're bringing stolen pesach and sick animals. Now, the Gemara says, the Gemara is comparing stolen to Pesach, just like a carbon Pesach that is puzzle if it has a permanent mum that you can't get rid of. A carbon Pesach animal like that can never be used, it can never come back to being usable because the mum doesn't go away. A stolen animal also has a permanent psul, a permanent mum, and you can never use it. So the Gemara says, why could you never use it? At some point you can have yish and shini rishus. And if the only problem is that it's not yours, because carbon also has to be yours, the Torah says mikem by a carbon, it says adam ki yaakov mikem, so the same sort of mikem could apply. So if the only problem is that it's not yours, at some point it will become yours. When the original owner is miyayish, it's yours. What then is the problem? Why do we say that it can never be used as a carbon? So it must be, the Gemara says, that it's because it's a mitzvah ba'avera, and even after the yish and shini rishus and shini maisa, whatever you want, it's still a mitzvah ba'avera, and that is a permanent psul that you're going to have to get rid of. So here we see a source that any mitzvah that comes about through an avera cannot be yotze a mitzvah with that. The Gemara now quotes further. Rav Yochanan says, name of Shimon ben Yochai. The Torah says in Yeshaya, Ki ani Hashem oiv mishpat, soine gezel ba'ola. I am Hashem, I love justice, and I hate theft in a ola. In a carbon ola. Again, saying, I don't want you to bring me a carbon ola. Hashem says, I was brought about through theft. The Gemara brings a mashal. The Gemara says it's like a king of flesh and blood who was traveling along the road, and he came to a tax collection booth. And he said to his servants, let's pay the tax. So they said, what do we have to pay the tax? The tax money goes to you anyway. What's the point in you paying the tax? So he said, I want everybody to pay the tax, and I want to be an example for all the people that we pay our taxes. Similar thing, Hashem, everything belongs to him. There's no such thing as stealing from Hashem, or Hashem stealing. Hashem can't steal. Everything's his anyway. But a carbon is going to be given to Hashem. He doesn't want it to come from the stolen. He wants it to become from legally owned things, and that will teach the world that you should only take things that are legally given to you, not things that are stolen. Okay, the Gemara brings more opinions on the topic of whether there's a psul of stolen. Gemara says, Rav Ami said that in the Mishnah it says a yavesh, a dried lulav, is puzzle. That's because it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. A stolen lulav is puzzle because it's a mitzvah b'avera. Yomar notes that Rav Yitzchak disagrees. Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmani says in the name of Shmuel that when the Mishnah says that there's a psul, it's only on Yom Tov Rishon. On Yom Tov Sheni, there's no psul. You could be yotze with a borrowed lulav, and you could be yotze with a stolen lulav. And he's obviously holding that there is no problem of mitzvah b'avera. The only problem is lachem. And after the first day, like we said in our introduction, after the first day, there's no problem of stolen or borrowed lulav. There's no issue of lachem. So the Gemara says, if you look carefully in the Mishnah, the Gemara asks, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak asks, Rav Nachman Yitzchak is asking on Rav Yitzchak Bar Nachmani. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak asks, if you look carefully in the Mishnah, it says, you can't use a dried lulav, you can't use a stolen lulav. The implication is that you could use a borrowed lulav. So what would be the situation in which a stolen lulav is puzzle and a borrowed lulav is kosher? If the only psul is lachem, they should always have the same halachos. Whenever you could use a stolen lulav, you could use a borrowed lulav. Whenever you can't use either of them. And there is no difference between the two. The first day you're allowed to use neither of them, and the second day you're allowed to use all of them. It must be that the psul is mitzvah b'avera, and a stolen lulav is puzzle because it's a mitzvah b'avera, and a borrowed lulav is not a mitzvah b'avera, which is not necessarily. It could be that the Mishnah means you can't use a borrowed lulav either. And it's talking about the first day. You can't use a stolen or borrowed lulav. But why doesn't it say you can't use a borrowed lulav? Because it's not a chiddush. The chiddush is a stolen lulav. You may think if I steal it right in front of the guy's nose, and he sees he can't get anything from it, he's meyayish on the spot, and therefore becomes mine on the spot, I'm allowed to therefore use it. And the person says, no, you should not assume that the person's meyayish just because you grabbed it away from him. You're clearly more powerful than him. He may think, I'm going to Beis Din tomorrow, and I will get my lulav back. Okay, the Gemara continues relating an incident that teaches some halachas on the subject. The Gemara says that Rav Huna used to tell people who were merchants of hadassim, if you buy hadassim from an akum, make sure that they cut it from the ground and give it to you. Don't let them tell you, you go cut it from the ground. Why? Because the land that an akum is on is quite likely stolen. And it could very possibly be stolen from a Jew. That being the case, the land still belongs to a Jew, and everything growing on the land belongs to a Jew. You cannot take possession of land by stealing it. Unlike movable objects, where if you take it, and the person's meyayish, it now belongs to you, land always belongs to the original owner, because you can't run away with it. It's there, it's land. So the land could very well belong to the original owner. Therefore, whoever is going to cut off the hadassim will be stealing it in that moment. So if the akum cuts it off, and then he gives it to you, so you have yish, you have shini rishus, and therefore the person is going to buy it and use it for the mitzvah as yaitza. No problem, there was yish and shini rishus, it belongs to him. If, however, you're going to pick it, so then there's no shini rishus. There's only, you're the thief, you're the one who's stealing it, besides the fact that you don't want to be the one who's stealing, because it still belonged to the Jew who owns the land all along. The person who's going to use it is not going to be yaitza. So Gemara asks, why not? Why do you say the person who's going to be using it is not going to be yaitza? He will be yaitza. There is still yish and shini rishus. You, the peddler, the merchant, is stealing, and then when he gives it to the buyer, so that's shini rishus from the peddler to the buyer. So there's yish and there's shini rishus. So Gemara says, okay, you're right, we're talking where the merchant is going to use the hadassim for himself. The hadassim that he takes for himself, those he has to be careful, it's not going to be any shini rishus. Because if he's the one who cuts it off from the tree himself, that's the theft, and there's no further shini rishus from there, and therefore he cannot take possession of it, and he won't be yaitza with it. Gemara says, but to shini ma'isa, once he ties it up with the hadassim, once he ties the hadassim up with the aravos and the lulav, now it's no longer just called hadassim, now it's called hushaina, now it's called the dalad midim, now it's called part of the lulav. So though that's a shini ma'isa, and you should be kind of with that, it should become his with that. The Gemara says, so either Rav Huna held that you don't have to tie it up. He held that there's no problem of tying up. Or he held that a change in the object that you're trying to take possession of that is reversible doesn't count as a change. It's only an irreversible change that you could say it's yish and shini rishus because it's not the same object you stole. If it's reversible, you tied it up. You could untie it. So that is not considered to be a significant change. So the Gemara now asks if there's another thing. It's shini shem. It used to be called hadassim, and now it's called hashainas. So Gemara says, no, hadassim are always referred to by the name hashaina. The word hashaina could always refer to hadassim, and therefore it's not really a change.
Drive Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.